As you probably know, first of all, I'm Leslie Northup. I'm the Dean of the Honors College. I'd like to welcome you to the Honors College Excellence Lecture Series. We've been privileged to host 14 distinguished speakers in the past, including geneticist Spencer Wells and Florida, the Swamp writer Michael Grunwald. But I think perhaps today I have the privilege of introducing the most prestigious and in some ways the most interesting of all of our speakers. Thank you. And that is, as most of you know, former senator and governor. You were governor too, weren't you? Yeah, that was before I came to Florida. He's been everything. Bob Graham. You're in the Graham building, named after his father, Ernest R. without a dot Graham. And he has offered to just sort of answer some informal questions while we get this seating arrangement worked out. So I'm not going to sort of have him launch into his speech right now. Let me introduce a few of distinguished guests who've joined us today and made this more of an occasion. We have a couple of members of our Community Advisory Board, Xavier Cortada, a very well-known local artist. We've got Barbara Bader, who is a fixture of FIU and who is the sponsor of an Honors College scholarship, for which we're eternally grateful. We have Mercedes Ponce, one of our newest community board members, and the person who's in charge of continuing programs at FIU. You'll see here particularly at BBC. Raise your hand. We have Joe Carvelli. Joe has been an ongoing supporter of honors and is one of our most enthusiastic community members. We have a number of distinguished faculty from the Honors College and not from the Honors College, and members of the administration as well. So I'm not going to list all those people. Let me just say a bit about Bob Graham and let him do the informal stuff first. Senator Bob Graham has been a public servant for almost 40 years. So all of you that we try to teach you leadership skills, this is what you are trying to emulate. I can't think of a man that you would most want to be like or more want to be like than Bob Graham. He's been in the state legislature. He was 2 terms as Florida governor. I was pretty sure about that. 18 years in the Senate. He has been a leader on issues ranging from education and health care to environmental preservation. He served 10 years on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, which sort of explains this book that's out there. If you would like to get a copy, this is your chance, called Intelligence Matters. Pretty clever title. Sounds like an Honors College kind of title. Which is based on his experiences during the joint inquiry on the resolution authorizing force in Iraq. If you'd like to buy it, there's the chance, and I'm sure Senator Graham would be happy to autograph it for you. So without further ado, I have cut this a little short, but let me introduce Senator Graham and let him take this how he wants to do it. He certainly knows more than I do how to handle a crowd. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean Northup. I very much appreciate the invitation, and any speaker likes to be delayed as they're opening up for more people to come in the audience. I'm going to be talking, obviously, about the significance of what happened on Tuesday and what that may mean for all of us in the next few years. But while I'm going to be focused on basically 3 areas, economics, national security, and citizenship, I know there are a lot of other areas that are of interest to the honors students, faculty, and guests here at FIU. So while we're setting up, I'd like to open it up for any questions that you'd like to have on any subject. And when a question is asked that is too difficult or contentious for me to answer, I'll stop the question and answer period and go to my speech. Okay, anybody have a question? Yes. Would you give your name and what year you're here and what you're majoring in?
My name is Brad Samore, and I'm a freshman here at FIU, majoring in music education. And I was just curious. I'll ask a question about the arts, because recently, when I was at my old high school in Palm Beach County, that's where I'm from, there was a lot of
what high school did you go
Wellington
to?
High School.
Wellington, yeah.
And there was a lot of budget cuts just in the whole county for music programs, art programs, theater programs, the arts in general. And I was just curious. A lot of people made it seem like, okay, well, that's the first thing to go when it comes to education. And I personally think, since I've been there, since I'm big in the arts, and I know that that's changed my life completely, I know that's changed lives for many other people, is there a better way to not make that the first thing to drop? Because some people think, oh, that's not necessary. We need to worry about math and science. And I'm not arguing that, but I'm just curious, is there a better way to help the arts programs rather than making that, cut right away?
Let me tell you a short story about one of the great figures in Western Hemisphere 20th century history. His name was Jose Figueres. Jose Figueres was the president of Costa Rica in the 1950s and 60s. Jose Figueres was the president who terminated the military in Costa Rica so that he could invest that money into education and health. One of his ideas was to bring a national symphony orchestra to Costa Rica, a relatively small, certainly by U.S. standards, poor country. There was a lot of criticism about this. They said, President Figueres, we support most of the things you've done, but it's really over the top to try to have a small country like Costa Rica investing in a national symphony orchestra. We just can't afford it. Figueres asked this question. He said, why do we in Costa Rica work so hard in the fields on our tractors if it is not to be able to listen to violins? He had got it right. He understood the purpose of life. And I think that maybe is the best answer to your question. Why are the arts important? They are why we do so many other things in order to be able to enjoy the arts. Why are they the first thing in line to be cut so frequently? Because people don't appreciate what President Figueres said so eloquently. In this state, there's another reason, and that is because the arts are not one of the subject areas that are tested. And the reality is in Florida, as in most places, if your subject isn't tested, it tends not to get taught, or not to get taught very much. Later on, when I make some comments, I'm going to talk about citizenship. And one of the reasons that Florida ranks so low in almost every category of citizenship is because we do a dismal job of teaching civics, and for much the same reason. The whole social studies, history, geography, economics, civics, none of that is tested on the FCAT, so there isn't an impetus to teach it or teach it well. So we have a more fundamental problem than an occasional budget cut. We have a fundamental appreciation of why the arts are so important and why the arts ought to be held at equal status to other areas of the curriculum in terms of testing student knowledge and aptitude in the arts. Okay, have we got, is everybody here anybody who is not here who wants to be here, would they please raise their hand and we'll wait for you. Is everybody here? Okay. Well, you got in the only early question, but what I'd like to do is at the end of my remarks, and I'm going to try to keep them mercifully short, to take any other questions that you might have. We've just lived through a historic day, November the 4th, 2008. A whole series of significant things have happened. First, unlike any election, at least since 1960, we're having a generational transition. President Kennedy, in his inaugural address in January of 1961, said the torch is being passed from the World War I generation to the World War II generation. Well, in many ways, the torch is being passed from the baby boomer generation to the post-baby boomer generation with the election of Barack Obama. Second, we've redrawn the electoral map. It was beginning to appear that of the 535 congressional and Senate seats in the United States, that only a very small number, maybe less than 10%, were truly competitive. What we have seen in this election is that that number has been expanded. There are now going to be at least 15 or more competitive states out of the 50 in America, and that is a good thing. As long as we keep the Electoral College, which by definition ends up making much of America irrelevant. If you happen to be a New Yorker or a Californian or a Texan, for instance, nobody cares to talk to you because you're not going to make any difference. But at least the number of places that candidates are going to want to talk to people has expanded as a result of this election. Third, no president will go into office with the political power that Barack Obama is going to have since Franklin Roosevelt. When Franklin Roosevelt was elected in 1932 and then reelected in 36, he had not only enormous public support but also tremendous congressional support. Barack Obama is going to have both of those. Next, there is a reawakening around the world, that's attitude to the United States. And let me tell you a story. I'm going to talk later about a commission that I'm chairing on the happy subject of avoiding the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The most important country to the United States in achieving that avoidance is Russia, primarily because it has so much of it. It has about almost half of the world's supply of nuclear materials and weapons, and a substantial percentage of the biological weapons that could be used. So our commission visited Russia, and we had been to a site where young Russian soldiers are being trained to secure nuclear facilities under U.S. funding and a great deal of U.S. assistance in their education. After the visit, we had lunch at a monastery. This is not just a monastery. This is in the Russian Orthodox Church, the equivalent of the Vatican. Very important site. We were hosted by a 20-year-old seminarian who spoke fluent English and was very knowledgeable about the United States. After we'd finished the tour and finished the lunch, we were in the parking lot, and the young seminarian asked me two questions. He said, one, are you a Democrat or Republican? And I said, I'm a Democrat. He said, are you supporting Barack Obama? I said, enthusiastically. Then he paused and he said, so am I. And it is very important to us. And it wasn't clear if when he said us, he meant Russians or meant young people around the world. It is very important to us that he be elected. So I think that there was a great cheer that reverberated around the globe when the results were announced Tuesday, and we will begin to see the tangible benefits of that in better international relations. And finally, and maybe the thing that is the most immediately obvious, is we broke through a barrier. I grew up in Dade County. I was born here. I'm going to have my birthday on Sunday. So anyone who would like to send cards or gifts, they'll be very much appreciated. I've lived all my life in this community. I went to school at Hialeah Elementary, Hialeah Junior High School, and Miami Senior High School, graduating in 1955. I never went to a class with a black student. I then went to the University of Florida for 4 years. Never went to class with a black student. The first black student that I went to school with, and there were only a very few, was at Harvard Law School, from which I graduated in 1962. It's hard for you who have grown up in the modern era to appreciate how segregated America was as recently as your parents' generation. This is an enormous change and signal of that change that we made on Tuesday. The idea of what is possible for all Americans of whatever color, whatever ethnic background, whatever gender, what predisposition, I think has just shifted. That this is truly a country in which the opportunity is available for all who are willing to prepare themselves to take advantage of those opportunities and then to do the things necessary to avail themselves. It is a tremendously significant election, and we've all had a chance to share in it. Now the question is, where do we go from here? I don't know if this movie may date me, but there was a movie called The Candidate in which Robert Redford played the role of a candidate for the U.S. Senate in California. And at the end of the movie, the very last line of the movie was the candidate turns to his campaign manager and says, "We've been elected. What do we do now?" That, frankly, is not an unusual question for a just elected candidate. I have a feeling that Barack Obama has a pretty good idea of what he is going to do now. I'd like to, as I indicated, talk about 3 areas of that and then open it up for any further questions that you would like to ask. Clearly, the most immediate challenge, the issue that dominated the election, fundamentally changed the election. The election, I think when the history of this is written, will be pre-September 15th, 2008 and post-September 15th, 2008. What happened on September 15th? The 3rd or 4th largest investment bank in America, Lehman Brothers, went bankrupt. That sent a shockwave through the financial markets and through the general economy, and we don't quite know yet just what all the pieces, what all the shrapnel of that shot will be. It also represented a change or a recognition of a basic change that's occurred in America. Going back at least to the Kennedy administration, we thought that the way to stimulate our capitalist economy was to put discretionary funds in the hands of the most affluent Americans. That was called supply-side economics. And the theory was that these affluent people, if they had more resources available to them, would prudently invest those resources in activities that would stimulate the economy, create jobs, and then we would all be the beneficiary of their wise management of those additional resources. That theory is now in collapse. First, the concept of prudent. We have seen too many of those people see the investment opportunities as more like a casino than a market place. And frankly, we've seen too many who, instead of investing it in things that benefited everybody, invested it in themselves, in enormous houses, yachts, multiple automobiles, all the things. My father, for whom I'm proud that this center is named, used a term called the bushwhack aristocracy. I'm not quite sure just where that phrase came from, but it indicated people who had become nouveau rich and were very arrogant in their display of that. We've got lots of folks, a few of whom happen to live in Miami, I might say. But the most fundamental thing that's happened is that there was an assumption under supply side that people would invest in the United States of America. That's what we knew. That's the economy we were comfortable with, and that's where our resources would go. Well, with all of the opening of the world, the globalization of the world, and with access to information about what's happening in places thousands of miles away from here, investors no longer felt constrained to consider only U.S. options for their money. So supply side had a big leak in its theory, in that a lot of the money that was going to the affluent wasn't ending up generating jobs in America, but was generating jobs in China or other places around the world. So I think that theory was essentially rejected by the voters on Tuesday. And the new theory is what I think is going to be demand side, which says, let's, instead of putting money in the most affluent, let's put money in the hands of those people who are most likely to spend it because they're living under fairly tight circumstances, and they would like to have that extra $200 to spend on their children's clothing or on all the other options that are available to them. One of my favorite places to be, and I was there yesterday, in fact, getting a new band for my Casio watch, was Walmart. It's a wonderful place to see demand-side economics at play, and also meet a lot of very interesting people. So I think the basic theory of Obama's economics is going to be to put money in the hands of those who are most likely to spend it. I believe it's a theory that's likely to begin to show some vigor in terms of our economy. I think you're also going to see a greater willingness to use government as a means of regulating the financial markets. The financial markets aren't intended to be the Wild West of just every person for themselves situation. It's supposed to be like an athletic event. There are rules if you're going to play football or baseball or tennis or whatever it is, and you play within those rules. We've had a lot of aspects of our economy that have been essentially without any rules. Warren Buffett, a guy who's done pretty well in this capitalist economy, described what's called credit default swaps as being a financial weapon of mass destruction, and it has just hit us. Next, I think you're going to see some of the things that we used to talk about as social policy but have now become economic that have been unattended be dealt with, and the most significant is going to be health care. Certainly health care is a social issue, but it also represents 1/6 of our national economy. And it has been particularly a drag on our export industries. General Motors, for instance, is supposed to pay more in health care of its employees than it does in the steel that's in the automobiles. That's a pretty heavy burden to put on our cars when Toyotas and Hondas don't have that kind of a burden. I think similarly with energy, that we're going to see a major emphasis on reducing our dependence on foreign oil. I suggest that when we sit here 10 years from now, when you celebrate my next decennial birthday, cards and gifts will be appreciated for that as well, that we probably will have come here in an electric car. Those lights up there will probably be powered by something that's a lot less energy demanding than whatever's powering them today. There'll be lots of changes in our lifestyle. And finally, I think that Obama is going to put a big emphasis on infrastructure renewal. We're living off the infrastructure of the 1950s. That's when the interstate was built. That's when much of the water and sewer and all those things that are so dull, but which we all rely upon, were installed. They're getting old. They're getting less serviceable, and anybody who wants to go get on the Palmetto Expressway at 5 o'clock can join me in the traffic jam and live what it means to have an inadequate highway system. So I think we're going to see some big changes in our economy in the next 4 years. And with the majorities that the Democrats have in the Congress, there's a very good chance that those ideas will, in fact, become reality. National security, every presidential candidate since the year 2000 has been asked this question: what is the most significant national security challenge facing the United States of America? Every candidate, both parties, has given the same answer, including Barack Obama and John McCain, that the most serious challenge facing our country is a weapon of mass destruction in the hands of a terrorist or a rogue state. I obviously agree with that assessment, first because I spent a lot of time as a member of the Intelligence Committee, and there are books outside which will give you in total detail. If you want to know what you're going to do tonight between now and when Stephen Colbert comes on at 11:30, this will help fill that time. But in our judgment, and we are about to issue our report after over 6 months of studying this issue, we think the problem is more severe today than it was on September the 11th. And we will state, and I will withhold the specific numbers, what we think the probability will be in the next 5 years of a weapon of mass destruction being used someplace in the world, with the United States the most likely target of that weapon. And I think you'll find it to be a very stunning figure. We think it is a realistic, maybe even an optimistic figure. There are a number of things that we've got to do to reduce this possibility, and fortunately that we can do. One of those I've already mentioned. We've got to rebuild our relationships around the world. We can't do this job alone. Russia, sitting on half the world's nuclear material, if they aren't reasonably engaged in trying to control those, there's no hope to keep them from falling into bad hands. We've got to also try to deal with the underlying ideological extremism which is fostering this. I mean, just think to yourself, what would cause you to want to devote your life to getting control of a weapon which will kill several hundreds of thousands of people none of whom you know, who you, I think, can assume are good, ordinary occupants of this same planet, and possibly blow yourself up at the same time? I mean, it takes a really serious ideology to drive people to do such an irrational act. And what can we do to try to bleed off some of that extremism, to clean the swamp, rather than just try to deal with the consequences of the swamp? We're going to have a lot of recommendations on that. Another area, and it's the final subject that I'd like to mention, is the role of the citizen. One of the things that we saw in this election was an enormous outpouring of citizen involvement on both sides. I was so impressed with the people who were part of the McCain and the Obama campaign, and then the people who responded to it by coming out to vote. I'm going to ask a question. Is Noel Fernandez here? Noel, would you please stand up? Now, this handsome young man, we got to become friends standing in line to vote about a week ago. And we had plenty of time to begin to cement our friendship. But this was Noel's first time to vote. Is that right, Noel? And it was heartwarming to see young people, Noel and his friends, who were willing to make that kind of a commitment as their very first act of a citizen in a democracy, that is, exercising that power that you gain at the age of 18 to vote and to have a direct role in influencing who's going to be leading our government. So, Noel, I thank you very much for, you said you were going to be here today, and you're a man of your word. Thank you for doing it. I tried to have some hard numbers about the youth vote, because I've given some talks recently, frankly, very critical of you, because I'm looking out in this audience and I see a lot of burly, strong young people. I'm not going to get into that fight today, but also there is good news. If anybody wants to go to sleep, we're about to get really dull here, so this is the time to do it. But the first election in which all 18-year-olds were constitutionally empowered to vote was 1972. And about half of the youth population in America voted in 1972. That's the good news. I guess maybe the good news. The bad news is that by the year 2000, that number had fallen from half to a third. So there had been a significant attrition, which I blame in part on the fact that we haven't been educating young people about what it means to be a citizen in a democracy. We haven't been motivating people to participate. In 2004, there was the first uptick since the 72. This year, let me give you the numbers that we do know, and I had hoped to get this for Florida, but it wasn't available. But there were, in 2004, the youth vote was 19.4 million. This year, the youth vote is estimated to be 24 million. So there's been a significant increase, so which means that uptick that started in 2004 at 19.4 million is going to be much higher in 2008. And I want to congratulate every one of you who is part of that. Barack Obama has a unique opportunity to keep this enthusiasm and to keep that army of volunteers, some almost 300,000 volunteers in this state alone, together as a force to help accomplish what he wants to do with the economy, with health care, with our national security. But it also is going to be a challenge to you. Now, I was going to give you a scary scenario to work from, but the good dean says that it maybe is not that scary. And that is, I have a good friend who is the chairman of the honors program at a large community college in Atlanta. And he told me that as their community college was facing budget cutbacks, that one of the things that got put on the chopping block was the honors program. This is a fairly expensive program per student compared to regular instruction. Is that correct, Dean? We won't tell anybody that. President Medique is gone today, so he won't. You think he knows that? And so I was going to give you a little talk about the importance of you who are going to be could be so directly affected by such, to recognize that you don't have to just take it, that you have the political capabilities, and if you are willing to work a little bit and get the political skills to make a difference. I'll give you an example of some students who did make a difference. I was speaking to a class of freshmen at the University of West Florida, which is the university in Pensacola that in many ways was the sister institution to FIU. Both had about the same time of establishment. And this class had been given an assignment. The assignment was to write to an elected official in that area of the state about some issue that was of concern to the student. And there were 25 students in the class. There were 25 letters went out to elected officials. How many elected officials do you think responded to those 25 students? Well, the answer was 6, which my Hialeah Elementary School math indicates that there were 19 that didn't. Okay, now let's say you were one of those 25 students, particularly one of the 19 who didn't get a reply. What would you do? Got any ideas? Come, yeah, did you have a suggestion? Write it a second time. Yeah, I'm afraid they wouldn't know that you were writing the second time because they'd put it in the same trash can that they put your first one into. Any other suggestions? What would you do? Yeah. Go visit them. Okay, that's actually a pretty good idea. I think they came up with a better idea. Yeah. What's that? Write to those that responded and thank them for being courteous enough to have recognized a citizen's inquiry. That would have been good for the 6 and probably would have caused them to maybe continue to write, but the 19 that didn't wouldn't probably be affected. Well, let me tell you what these students did. The first thing they did is they recognized that they had a political problem. A political problem, in my definition, is a problem to which the application of political techniques can make a difference. If the problem was that the trees in the parking lot were shedding too many leaves, that's not a political problem. This is a political problem. And the problem is defined as public officials being non-responsive to their constituents. That's the political problem. So what did they decide to do? They decided to have a press conference. And they listed the 25 letters that were written and to whom they were written, and maybe something about what the subject of the letter was. And they called the television stations from Pensacola, the Pensacola News Journal, etc. And they put this sign up, and they said, here are the 6 people who responded to us. Here are 19 people elected in this community who didn't care enough about what their citizens were saying to even write a letter in response. You know what? That probably really burned those 19 people, because nobody likes to look at the 6 o'clock news and see their name on a list of non-responsive public officials. I cite that simple example to illustrate that you don't have to just sit there and take it. There are things that you can do that will make a real difference, and frankly, I bet those kids had a hell of a good time when they did that. They felt good about themselves because they had not just been passive spectators sitting in the stands. They'd gotten down onto the field and made things happen. That's what your power is. You used it on Tuesday to take the country in a new direction. But you can use your power as a citizen in this democracy every day to make your life better and to make the life better of the people that you care about. That is your challenge. We are going to be living through an extremely exciting period, and you don't want to be just sitting at the top row of the new football stadium at FIU watching the action. You want to be down on the field as a player. That's my challenge to you. Be a player. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we've had the arts. Do we have any other questions? Yeah, sir, not just because the photographer is between you and me, but I'm going to hold you to the end. You have another good question, okay? That was pretty significant, the one you just did. Yes, yes, sir. Could I do this? I'm going to recognize someone else so that the people with the microphones could get. Who would like to ask a question? Yeah, I know you're going to ask this question, but the next person the gentleman kind of in the middle of this crowd here, the handsome young gentleman with the fancy T-shirt. Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. Do you think America's made a shift from right, center to left with this landslide election for the Democratic Party?
I'm sorry, is
Do you
this
think
a...
America's made a shift from center right to left with this landslide election for the Democratic Party?
I think Obama is going to be a center left. That is, he's going to be expanding the role of government, such as in areas of regulation of the financial system. But he's not, he was accused of being a socialist or a communist or something. He ain't no socialist or communist, or he wouldn't have gotten elected. But I think you will see a more activist federal government than you have, at least in the last 8 years.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, the gentleman right here in the middle. Okay, somebody else? How about the gentleman on the aisle over here? And doesn't any lady want to ask a question? I'm trying to be non-discriminatory. Okay, the next one will be the lady over there by the screen. Yes?
Okay. I'd like to say first, happy early birthday.
What's that?
Happy early birthday.
Thank you. Do you want my address for the gift?
No, thank you. But Obama's the first, everyone's been saying he's the first African president, but clearly he's of a mixed race. You've seen, okay. But do you think the fact that he's of mixed race helped him? If he was just purely from African descent, do you think he wouldn't have made it this far?
I don't think what his percentage of bloodlines was relevant. The fact that, he had already been, and this is really quite an amazing statistic. There have been almost 2,000 Americans who served in the United States Senate, including Barack Obama. Do you know how many of African American descent have served in the United States Senate? 3. So the fact that over 200 plus years we've only had 3 African Americans able to get elected to the U.S. Senate, and now suddenly they've been elected President of the United States of America, is quite a phenomenal thing. I think the fact that he has had such a diverse personal background. His mother was a white woman from Kansas. His father was a black man from Kenya. He lived in Hawaii, lived with his grandparents, who, of course, his grandmother has just passed away, and then lived in Indonesia with his mother's second husband. That's an unusual childhood and adolescence. But I think all of those experiences have affected who Barack Obama is in the same way that our experiences affect who we are, and that he's going to bring a very rich set of values and personal experiences to this position, which I think is very good for the country.
Thank you. Can I ask you one more question?
Okay. Muy corto, por favor.
Okay.
You like that? I just moved from one language to the other fluently.
The bank bailout was said to be a very socialist idea, but people are also claiming that Obama is a very socialist person and they don't want a socialist to be president. You just said that he wasn't, so I'm seeing 2 different views here. Could you help explain that?
Well, I think I don't know. Maybe this is unfair. I'm going to answer the question, why were people saying Barack Obama was socialist? I think it had to do with that word redistribution, that he was seen as being someone who was going to redistribute income. Well, the reality is any tax system redistributes income. I mean, that's an inherent part of a tax system. And the question is not whether it's going to redistribute, it's what is the philosophy of the redistribution and what is the consequence of the redistribution. As I indicated earlier, in supply side, and this was done during both Democratic and Republican administrations, so it's not a partisan concept, but in supply side, we redistributed the money up. and with this theory that they would spend it and would all be better off. As I say, I think that theory has kind of run out of gas, and so now we're looking at a different theory to accomplish the same ultimate objective, which is a growing, prosperous economy which we'll all share. But now we're going to be looking to accomplish that by putting money in the hands of people who are the most likely to spend it, create demand for services and products. So he was called a socialist because he believed in redistribution. And the irony is the tax cuts of 2001, which are sort of the key to this as a matter of specific action, John McCain voted against them, declared them to be irresponsible. So there wasn't any difference between the two candidates' position on that issue. And I think now we'll get past the silliness of trying to put a pejorative label on things, and let's deal with some tough economic realities. Yes, this, and then the lady over there under the screen is going to be next.
My question is concerning health care.
Yeah.
Barack Obama is stating his policy is to offer insurance that the federal government employees receive at a reduced rate. In my studies of government programs such as Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all of those monies are going down the tubes and close to bankruptcy. How is he going to afford paying for health care for millions of people who can't afford it themselves?
Well, I will say I've had only 1 hour or more meeting with Barack Obama, and that was last fall when he was in Tallahassee, and I had lunch with him. We talked about 2 things. One, Afghanistan. And when you buy the book Intelligence Matters, which is available just outside the door, you'll see that the reason I voted against the resolution to go to war in Iraq was because I thought we were moving from the right target, which was al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, where they just killed 3,000 Americans, to the wrong target, Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And so my pitch to then candidate Obama was that he ought to not just say I'm for getting out of Iraq, but that I'm for getting out of Iraq because we got a more important job to finish over there in Afghanistan. And I'm pleased that he, I think, said that. Totally because of my influence. He would have never thought of that before. Then the second thing was health care. And I was impressed, maybe you're always impressed when people agree with you. I have described myself as being a raging incrementalist. I don't think there are very many things in a country as big and complicated as the United States that happen with a Hail Mary pass. Most touchdowns are scored because you gain 4 or 5 yards in 12 plays and get into the end zone. And in terms of health care, that's how I think we are going to need to proceed. And I believe this is what you're going to see President Obama suggest. My own feeling is that the first step we should take is to cover all children. It's about 25% of the uninsured today are under the age of 18. So it's a big group of people, relatively inexpensive to cover because young people don't have the kind of health problems that, frankly, people of my age, and my birthday is Sunday, gifts. And third, there are some programs in effect, such as the S-CHIP program, which is the state federal matching program for children's health care, that could easily be expanded, that is without much additional administrative cost, to cover all children. I can give you what I think the second, third, and fourth step ought to be, but keeping in mind that your goal is to end up covering everybody, but you're going to get to that goal step by step. And that's what I personally expect we'll see from an Obama presidency. Yes, ma'am.
This is the first
Now,
time.
well, I think I'll let this gentleman get off the hook of giving his name and his grade level and his major.
My name is Iris Febres. I'm a junior and I'm an English major here. This was really my first election, really into it, following all the polls, looking at websites, and Tuesday was my Christmas. So Barack Obama won, got an overwhelming support for the popular vote. So I started thinking, what about the Electoral College? Do you think that the Electoral College should stay up or completely obliterated?
Well, if you had a blank slate, I don't think you would come up with a system that says that 2/3 of the states and more than that as a percentage of the population essentially are irrelevant because they're so clearly going to be either Democratic or Republican that neither party is going to spend any time campaigning there. That's not a rational system. It was developed back by the founders when they realized most Americans coming out of the colonial period were illiterates, and they didn't know who John Adams was or maybe even George Washington. And so the theory was that instead of voting directly for president, you would vote for people that you knew in your own state, and they in turn would then determine who to vote for. It was a very kind of aristocratic concept. We've long since left that period, and electors are just ciphers. I mean, they vote for whoever the people in the state voted for. They don't exercise independent judgment. So it's not the greatest system. But frankly, as a politician, you'd have to amend the U.S. Constitution. To do that, you've got to get 2/3 of the vote in the House and the Senate and 3/4 of the state legislatures. Well, the fact is there are a lot more than 25% of our states which benefit by this system. If we were here at the University of Vermont in Burlington, we'd be pretty pumped up because our little population got to have 3 electors. They were individually much more important than we are here in Florida, and they are not about to give it up. So I'm going to spend the rest of my political life taking on causes that I think have some chance of success, and that ain't one of them. Yes, ma'am. Oh, okay. All right. Who's got the microphone now? All right, and then the lady in orange is going to be the next one. Yes, sir.
My name is Brian Alonso. I'm a political science and international relations double major, and I'm a freshman. And as an independent, in this election, I didn't vote for Obama or McCain, but now that President Obama is elected, I have a feeling that he has a chance to unite this country after a lot of division and a lot of partisanship. And my question basically breaks down...
Most of the great religions in the world believe in the redemptive spirit, that just because you've wandered at one time doesn't mean that you can't come home, and we welcome you back.
I'll meditate on that. But as far as supply-side economics, we've seen the abuses and the problems it's led to corporate welfare over the years. I just have a few questions on demand side. I agree that infrastructure and education is very important and we need to reform it. I just have some concerns as where the money will come from, since we're facing such a large deficit and a trade gap with China. Will it mean that we will have to increase taxes or cut programs? And also, a very important question. I'm really in a middle bracket. Like, the Republicans aren't going to give me any money because I'm not rich enough. And I'm concerned as to where basically money will go from Obama. If it will go to the lowest brackets and then the middle class will be taxed. I don't know if that's true, but I just want to know how Obama will help the middle class and what will be done to avoid wasteful bureaucracy.
Well, I think the Obama theory is that we're going to try, instead of putting most of our discretionary resources in the affluent class, we're going to put it in the middle class, which he defines as being people who earn under $250,000 a year, with the expectation that they will spend it and that will regenerate the economy. Come back in 5 years and we'll see how that theory worked. I don't think it's a socialist theory or any of those bad labels. I think it's just another way to approach the question of, in a capitalist economy, how does government distribute the burdens in such a way as to create the best chance for general prosperity. Yes, the lady.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for coming again. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I've got to know the name, grade level, and discipline of such a smart, compassionate person.
Thank you. My name is Ingrid Benson. My major is international relations, and I am a senior. I graduate this
What do
spring.
you hope to be doing 5 years from now, Ingrid?
I would like to be practicing law.
Oh, good.
I am very happy that Barack Obama has been elected. It's a dream come true. And what I'm wondering is the status of the Republican Party. They have, I'm not a Republican, and I'm very sad
Excuse
to
me,
say.
who did you say was a Republican?
No, because there are there's a radio station that says these horrible things, and you know, I don't know why there's no regulation over them, because it's more like hate radio, and I just don't understand the direction of the Republican Party, and but also I wanted to know about what Obama's plans were for the economy over the banks, and whether he was going to continue with what Bush has done, or if he's going to do something different.
Well, first, let's talk about freedom of speech. In this country, the theory of the First Amendment to the Constitution was that government didn't have any role in controlling what people said. Now, over time, there were a few exceptions. For instance, you couldn't jump up in this audience and scream fire and cause panic, and maybe people would get hurt in the crush to get out. But with a few sort of obvious common sense exceptions, you can say just about anything you want to. The theory is that there will be other voices that will be saying, giving alternative opinions, and that then the people will take in all this information and decide what they think is the truth. It's probably not a perfect system, but it's, as Winston Churchill said, democracy was not a perfect form of government. It's just better than all the other alternatives. And so I think the way we deal with speech is better than all the alternatives, even if it occasionally results in the kind of diatribe that you just said. In terms of the economy, I think that Obama will be more willing to establish some rules for the economy and to effectively enforce those rules than we've seen in the last 8 years. And I personally, I'm a capitalist, and I believe in the free market, but to me the free market is not chaos. It is a system that has understood rules by which people operate so that everybody is treated fairly and there is transparency, openness, visibility to what's going on, and people can make good choices. Okay. How about the lady in the white Puma sweatshirt?
Hi, my name is Aileen. I'm studying political science, international relations, and Portuguese. And my question was about the amendment to the Florida Constitution about the funding of community colleges, about making the local taxes and stuff like that. What's your view on that?
Well, I was a strong supporter of that, and frankly, I was shocked that it did so poorly. And I really don't have any idea why it did so poorly, because it seemed to have almost universal support. What the amendment said basically was that within the communities of a particular community college, such as Dade County with Miami-Dade, that if the people felt they would be prepared within that community to pay additional sales tax to support that community college, they would have the right to vote on it, to do so, which seems to me a fairly reasonable proposition. We have exactly that for K-12. In fact, I believe in Dade County we've passed some sales tax that goes to the public schools. So it wasn't a novel idea, just applying it in a different area, and the ultimate decision would be made by those people who would both benefit by the improvements to the community college system and would pay the taxes for those benefits. But for some reason, majority of Floridians didn't even get 50%, not much less the 60% that it takes to pass as a constitutional amendment. Okay, where's the microphone? Okay, what about the is it in the back in the green shirt? Yes. I apologize. I'm too vain to put on glasses, and I'm too blind to be able to see everybody. So.
All right. My question is about national security. Like, given Russia's actions in the past couple of days and their stance in Georgia, do you feel like we should worry about that situation escalating into something higher, or?
Yes, and as I said, we spent a lot of time studying this issue and came to the conclusion that Russia was the #1 country in terms of avoiding the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. I might tell you that the second was Pakistan. And so and our position is going to be that our relationship with Russia I describe as being somewhat like a testy marriage. There are going to be bad days and good days in this relationship. And we've had more of the bad than the good in the last few months. But just like a marriage, you don't want to have the first fuss that you have with your spouse to lead you to the divorce court. You've got to try to live through these because you've got some broader things like the love that you share, and if you have children, the nurturing of the children that are have to be given primacy. Well, I think in the case of Russia, the primacy is to keep all those damn nukes under control, because those are the things that can really do us serious hurt. And we're going to have to be mature enough to be able to get through the bad days without blowing up the world. I hope we'll say it a little more artfully than that, but that basically is what we're going to be saying. And let me tell you one thing that really got our attention. We were going to visit those two countries, Pakistan and Russia. We took off from Dulles, which is the international airport serving Washington, and flew to Kuwait. Got off the plane at Kuwait. This is on September the 20th, about 7:30 at night. We're standing in the terminal, beautiful new terminal, waiting for the flight to Islamabad when one of our companions' BlackBerry went off, and the message was that the hotel that we were going to be staying in that night in Islamabad had just been blown up. That kind of focuses your attention on just how fragile life is and how fragile this world that we live in is. And I think it brought our group together with a renewed commitment to do what we could to try to advance some ideas that we think will make it less likely that that hotel will be blown up by a nuke. Okay, how about the gentleman in the back there? Yeah, you.
Good evening, Senator. I'm Jeffy Jacob, a junior majoring in biology. I wanted to ask you, as in an Obama administration backed by the Congress, how do you see they're going to deal with the Iraq War and and possibly involvement in Pakistan or getting out of Afghanistan? How do you see them dealing with the Iraq War?
Well, I think Senator Obama, as a candidate, laid out a pretty clear course. He wants us to get out of Iraq as quickly as we can, responsibly, and he set a 16 months deadline. So I would say that by the summer of 2010, we're going to be substantially out of Iraq, but not all those troops are going to be coming home. I think probably 25,000 to 50,000 are likely to be over in Afghanistan, because that's the degree to which most of the military thinks we're undermanned there in order to be able to accomplish what I think is the most important security mission that we've got, which is to take out the Taliban. How about the lady in the aqua? And then the gentleman in the black shirt with the orange burst, or the gold burst on his chest is next, okay? You ready? Okay.
Hello, my name is Maria Jamas. I'm a freshman and I'm changing my major to international relations in the spring. What I'm about to say is like a suggestion and a question at the same time. I was reading the New York Times online last night, and I found an article that said that since our economy is so bad, investors in the United States are moving their money in banks from here to banks in Lebanon, because the banks over there are so much more stable, because they're so used to turmoil. Do you think it would be a good idea for the United States to look onto other countries for an example on how to build strength for our banks?
Yes. My wife happens to be Lebanese. I've been to Lebanon a couple of times. The idea that people are saying Lebanon, a country that's been at war for the better part of 25 years and shows all the scars of it, is more stable than the United States, is kind of not a good commentary on where we are. But yes, in fact, in this current financial crisis, our Secretary of the Treasury had put forth some ideas, and then a few days later, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Gordon Brown, put out some ideas, and immediately we moved to the British plan. So I think we are open to what other countries think is the best course of action. In part, going back to this globalization, we can't solve this problem alone. We can't make the world right by just making America right. We've got to make the world right by working with the world to make the whole planet economic system function.
Thank you.
Okay. Dos preguntas.
Just first of all, tomorrow is my birthday, so happy birthday to you.
So you're a Scorpio.
I am a Scorpio and proud to be one, too.
Well, you know, Scorpio, you see that attitude right there. See, Scorpios, their reputation is they're arrogant, they're self-assured, they're kind of obnoxious. So we share this, yes.
My question is actually something a little bit more local. At the beginning of your remarks, you spoke about the FCAT. And toward the end of your remarks, you challenged us to do things to exercise our political power. Is there anything in your... I detest the FCAT. I always have. I always will. I think that it's ridiculously limited the curriculum that we're teaching in our schools, and that's bad for our schools. Is there anything that you think, in your opinion, that we can do as students in the system and as possibly future parents of students in the system to get rid of this abomination of a test?
Well, listen, we may be arrogant, obnoxious, hard to get along with. We're smart, we Scorpios, and that's a very smart question. The answer is yes. Now, you can decide how much of this you want to attack. One of the things I'm working on is to try to get social studies included in the FCAT. And our friend over here wants to get the arts included. So I think you can attack it at that level by saying we reluctantly are keeping the same system, but we're expanding it so that it covers more subjects and therefore doesn't continue this practice of if you ain't tested, you ain't taught. Now, more broadly, I think the advocates of FCAT have coupled accountability with the FCAT, saying that if you don't favor the FCAT, you don't favor accountability. I think that's BS. The fact is there are a lot of ways, and to go back to the previous question about can we learn something from other places, I've been impressed with what the British have done. And just briefly, they have what they call the school inspector system. And every 2 years, a group generally of around 5 people, made up of people from education, from health, including mental health, and community development, go to every school in Great Britain. And they meet with the teachers, the administration, the parents, the kids. They go out into the community, and then they come up with an assessment of that school and the neighborhood in which it operates. And they say and they suggest what needs to be done in order to make that school a more effective learning place. Unlike the FCAT, they recognize that today much of what a child learns isn't what they learn in a classroom with 25 other children. It's what they learn all the time that they're not in the classroom. Why did Barack Obama put such an emphasis on telling parents, turn off the TV, take away the Game Boys, and get a book for your kids? Because he was recognizing that there's a lot of important things that are outside the classroom, but which end up affecting the child's performance in the classroom. So I guess if I were going to take on the system, I would say we need to keep accountability. That's important. But there are different ways to do it that will be more rational and will help achieve our shared objective of the best developed children that our society can produce. So I think you ought to organize a chapter of the British inspector system for FIU and take on the world, or at least Tallahassee. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Marlene Palomo. I'm also a political science major. I'm a freshman here at FIU.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to John A. Ferguson. John A. Ferguson.
Johnny Ferguson.
Yes.
Did anybody here go to Miami Senior High School? Hey, look at that. The few, the proud, the stingeries. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I'm a Falcon, but that's okay. I have a question about education as well. However, it's concerning university funding. Do you think that we will truly be able to see an increase in university funding when it comes to scholarships and grants by the next 4 years?
Well, I understand, and I hope this is not speaking out of school, that in the next few days the governor is going to make a statement about where he thinks higher education should go, with particular emphasis on the issue of how we fund higher education. I think that'll be very significant because of all the activities of state government, the one that carries the heaviest imprint of the governor is higher education. Public schools are run by elected school boards. The cabinet gets involved in other areas of state government, but higher education is almost exclusively a gubernatorial responsibility, and therefore significant change requires gubernatorial initiative. And we're, I think, about to get some idea of what that direction may be. So I would suggest wait a few days, see what the governor said. If you think he's got it right on, write him a letter, congratulate him for his good plan, ask what can you do to help get his good plan adopted. If you think it's something less than that, then you might write a different kind of letter. Oh, is that it? Those. Thank you.
Don't go away. Thank you. Don't go away. Don't everybody get up. First of all, I want to let Senator Graham know that people were leaving not because they were bored, but they have 5 o'clock class. So,
You mean you didn't suspend their time?
no, I don't have that power, unfortunately. And anyway, I want them to go to class. But I also want to remind the rest of you that we have a reception with food and a chance for you to meet Senator Graham immediately following this, so don't all run away. And get his book signed.
Yes.
Get his book signed.
Those
of you who didn't get a chance to get your questions answered, you'll still get a chance on a more personal level, perhaps. I get the feeling that Senator Graham enjoys doing this, so I don't think he has to rush right out immediately. So there'll be a little reception. We'll remove this screen over here, and there'll be some food. Senator Graham does not get out of here easily. He is forced to join a notorious club of people who we sort of induct as honorary members of the Honors College when they come and do something wonderful for us like this. So if you two would come forward, please. With this polo shirt, I create you a member of the FIU Honors College, and this is something all of our students get when they come in. As you may have seen photos on our website and so on, we have a big parade at our convocation each year. Our students carry flags of all the nations and states they come from, and now you are eligible to come and march in the parade as well. So, and then we also have.
I am very honored to join this distinguished group, and I genuinely admire this university for offering an honors college and for your making that extra personal effort to take advantage of it. I am glad that I am now going to be one of your number without ever having to attend any classes, write any papers, and particularly take no exams.
And it's just a memento of the occasion. We'd like to. And I know that Michael's going to want us to stand in a way that he can take a photo. So.